Hi guys, today I'm going to be talking about observational research, or particularly naturalistic observation. Okay, let's get this blown up. Okay, well, I'm going to talk about, again, naturalistic methods today. And so with naturalistic methods, we are really talking about going out into a natural environment and observing. So we can describe naturalistic and observational methods. I'm going to close this. Describe naturalistic and observational research, including the advantages and disadvantages. We'll talk about the case study, and we'll talk about systematic coding methods, and then archival methods, including content analysis. So first, objective one, describing naturalistic or observational research and the advantages and disadvantages. So basically, naturalistic or observational research is when participants are observed in their natural habitats. So for example, we could observe students in the classroom, and that would be naturalistic observation. Sometimes people use hidden cameras to do this so that the participants will act naturally. They might even become part of the group, so pretend as though they're another student in the classroom, let's say, or they can just stay there long enough to make people not notice them. We call that habituation. So one of the big questions is, are you going to be an observer, or are you going to be a participant? So if I wanted to observe students in the classroom, I could do it by pretending that I was a student, and that would be a participant observer. Or are you going to be a non-participant and just be an observer and just actually sit there with a clipboard? Well, you can imagine if you are a participant, you might be able to get more information because you're interacting with students as a student yourself. Another thing that you're going to have to decide when you do naturalistic observation is whether it will be overt or covert. And covert means hidden. So you could, for example, hide behind a one-way mirror so that students don't see you observing, or you could put in a hidden camera. That would be another way of doing it. Of course, all these have ethical ramifications. Overt would mean they see you and they know you're observing them, but then of course they don't act very naturally. So let's take a look at some of those advantages and disadvantages. One of the advantages of using naturalistic observation to record behavior is that you do get low reactivity, in the sense that students are not reacting to being watched, as long as you're doing covert observation, meaning that your observation is hidden. They don't know that you're observing them. It will have high external validity, meaning that it is true in natural settings, because you're looking at people in natural settings and they're going to behave in natural settings as they normally would in natural settings. Whereas if you took them into a laboratory and had them behave, they're going to behave less naturally. A disadvantage here is that you don't have informed consent. In the case of overt observation, where you have, say, a hidden camera in a classroom, well, that's a big ethical question. Is that an invasion of privacy to be able to record somebody's behavior in the classroom when they don't know that they're being recorded? It's also very time consuming to sit and watch people, much more time consuming than giving them a questionnaire. And again, if you have, an overt observation where they know that you're recording them, there sometimes is a lot of reactivity in those cases. People act differently when you're watching them. Objective number 2, we're going to talk about the case study, including the advantages and disadvantages. A case study is when you do an in-depth study of one situation or one case, meaning one person. For example, this woman who is blasting off in a chair. She kind of reminds me of Dr. Ganescu. Usually the case is a person, and no variables are manipulated. You're just simply studying this person in depth. We do it to document rare disorders, rare cases. For example, you might have heard about HM or Genie in psychology, those rare cases that have been studied very much in depth. It's hard to find a lot of people to do these studies on because they're so rare. An advantage of the case study is to be able to do an in-depth description and be able to describe a rare occurrence. And so that gives you that advantage of, you know, you've got this really rare occurrence and you can describe that in detail and get it out in a scientific study. The disadvantage is that it's really hard to conclude cause and effect. We're not manipulating any variables. So it's really hard to say what causes what caused the person to be this way. And then, of course, there's a problem with external validity in the sense that it's hard to generalize from this person to other people. So just because we know a lot about this one woman who blasted off in a chair, does that tell us anything else about people who blast off into a chair? Hard to say. Okay. So objective 3, we're going to talk about being able to perform systematic coding methods. This would be something like what's going on here. They have recorded certain things that, you know, an infant has done. So surprise related facial expression, body stilling, face sobering, looking at floor, looking to the mother. And of course, you can see they've compared American, Japanese, Chinese, and all groups there. How do you develop these categories? So one of the things you're going to have to do first is figure out what behavioral categories you're going to develop. What are you going to observe? You're going to go out and observe children on a playground, for example. Are you going to observe aggression, helping, play? What are you going to observe? You know, so you'll have to define those, operationally define those categories. And then you'll have to also figure out how to observe it. Are you going to do individual sampling where you watch only one person at a time? And we do that. We can sometimes call that a 10-minute focal sample. You just watch this person for 10 minutes, and then you watch the next person for 10 minutes, and then you watch the next person. Or maybe you're doing an event sampling where you're only recording particular events. And so, for example, you might record every time a child has physical contact with another child, but you're sort of scanning for that all over. So, for example, in the study there in the depicted in the picture, this study is examining people's reactions to being asked for money. So the guy on the left is asking the guy on the right for money. And what they're doing is they're just recording that person's reaction to that. But of course, they had to develop some behavioral categories to do that. Now, in cases of observational research, we always have to do inter-rater reliability to make sure that this coding scheme is a reliable one. So we would have 2 people watch the interaction and record the interaction and make sure that they were scoring it the same way, both of those people. Okay, finally, objective 4, describing archival research, including content analysis. Archival research. Archival research is when you go in and you look at written records. So you use existing material. I just recently did an archival study where we looked up a whole bunch of articles and we analyzed those articles for the content of those articles. So we didn't have any participants. Our participants were the articles. And so you could use a lot of different existing material as a source of data. For example, you could study lyrics as we did in a previous study, and you could look at, you know, lyrics in various genres of music, or lyrics that are music that's popular with different age groups, let's say. Some people, lots of people have measured social media, the content of tweets and things like that. Presidential speeches, all of those are going to require what we call content analysis. And that's where you develop a systematic coding scheme to quantify the information in the documents. So, for example, in social media, maybe you want to study narcissism, okay? The love of oneself or the promotion of oneself. You'd have to figure out an operational definition for narcissism to be able to recognize it in a social media post. Okay, in a content analysis for archival research, you might, you know, again, go in and operationally define those variables. And in class, we'll talk about some operational definitions of aggression and fear in presidential speeches, and we'll look at some speeches of Presidents Obama and President Trump. Okay, finally, archival research advantages and disadvantages. One of the problems, one of the advantages, excuse me, of archival research is that we get access to behaviors that are unobservable. So, for example, you may be able to look at what people are doing on social media from the comfort of their own home. We can't see them doing it, but we can use those records. The data may be more truthful than self-report because we don't have a reactivity problem. So if we see what people are doing on social media and we're recording that as opposed to asking them what they do, it's probably more truthful to see what they actually do. Disadvantages include getting permission to use the records. So social media posts may be difficult to get a good sample. You'd have to get some cooperation from, say, Facebook, Twitter, or whatever. Otherwise, you only have access to people who are in your contact base. Finally, the accuracy of the data often depend on those who recorded it. So if somebody else is recording the data in a database, there may be errors in that database, and there will be then errors in your data that have been recorded from that database. So I hope this video was helpful, and that is the end of chapter 6.